as the great irony of the Megillah really starts to turn around today. Achashverosh asks Haman what should be done for the man who the king desires to honor. And of course Haman, thinking that it's about himself, essentially sets the trap for himself, which again, of course, is a meta-theme of the Megillah, by suggesting this really elaborate display of honor to be shown to the man who the king wishes to honor, who then, of course, Achashverosh turns and says, do everything that you said to Mordechai. What's interesting, though, is if you look carefully at the details of Haman's suggestion, one notices that one item drops out from the list. If one looks carefully, the Megillah says that Haman says to Achashverosh that one should take the royal clothing which the king had worn, the horse the king rode on, and which the royal crown is placed on his head. What's interesting, though, is after that pasuk, you never hear again about the crown. You hear about the clothing, you hear about the horse, but the crown seems to drop out. So there are three basic approaches one finds in the Mefarshim to explain this anomaly. The first is the approach which is found in the Ralbag, and the Targum Sheni also essentially adopts this approach, which is that the crown was implicit and from then on basically folded into the clothing. In other words, each time that the Psukim reference clothing, first Haman thinking about himself and then Mordechai, implicit in that is that the crown should be placed on his head as well. And in fact, the Targum Sheni specifies that Achashverosh tells him to go into his treasury to find the large golden crown given to him by the Macedonians at the time of his ascension to the throne, that it's specifically that crown that should be placed in his head. The second approach is found in the Ibn Ezra. And the Ibn Ezra suggests that if one looks at the way that the pasuk is worded carefully, that the crown does not go on Achashverosh, but literally it says you should put him on the horse which the king rides, and which the crown was put on his head. So the Ibn Ezra suggests that his, in that pasuk, is not a reference to Achashverosh, but actually part of the livery, I guess, that the horse was attired in when the king would ride in him, was there was a certain crown that was actually placed on the horse itself. And that's what the pasuk means. And so therefore, from that first pasuk and on, it is implicit not in the clothing, but as part of the horse. That the horse that Mordechai was to ride on was the horse that the crown was placed on his head. The Gra essentially explains along a similar vein with a slight difference. He sees the crown, again, as having gone on Achashverosh's head, but what Haman meant is the horse that you rode when the crown was first placed on your head. In other words, again, it winds up devolving on the horse, even though the crown still goes on Achashverosh's head. That what Haman suggested is that the horse that he thought for himself and that Mordechai would ride on should be the horse that Achashverosh rode as part of his coronation. And again, both of these approaches preserve the idea that Haman did not actually suggest that the royal crown should be placed on someone else's head, which one would imagine really is a really jarring kind of notion. The truth is, even riding on the royal horse is itself a fairly shocking idea. In halacha, one of the ways that we show off for the king, as recorded by the Rambam in the Laws of Kings, is nobody is allowed to ride on the royal horse. So the truth is, there is almost an audacious nature even to that request, and helps us to get a full picture of exactly what Haman was advocating. The final approach to the conundrum of the crown is that of Rashi. And Rashi really suggests that Haman really meant to place the crown on his head, but he saw the reaction of Achashverosh when he said that, and that Achashverosh really saw that. And again, if we assume that Achashverosh's mental state was that he was really almost paranoid about the possibility of rebellion, that his mind was churning through what was going on between Esther and Haman, why Esther keeps inviting Haman to parties with him, and especially on the backdrop of the assassination plot of Bigsan and Saresh, right? And the whole idea of honoring Mordechai is to try to put more people in his corner who might be able to prevent future assassination plots. When Haman says, put the crown on the head of the person the king wishes to honor, the king's face clearly displayed anger. And we see that Haman backtracks and says, all right, forget the crown. And the crown is never mentioned again. So three approaches to the mysterious disappearing crown. Number one, that the crown is implied after Haman's first statement. Number two, with slight variations between the Ibn Ezra and the Gra, that the crown doesn't refer to wearing the crown, but either that the horse wore a crown or the horse that was ridden when Achashverosh first wore the crown. And finally, the approach of Rashi, who says that that Haman intended to wear the crown, but changes his whole approach once he sees the reaction of Achashverosh.